Serotonin is one of the major neurotransmitters, really one of the most important because it has such far-reaching effects. It's also responsible for a lot of side effects when we increase it in areas of the body where we don't want it, such as the gastrointestinal tract. So it can give you diarrhea, make you sleepy, and block your orgasms. All of those are dose dependent and they're antidotes, and a lot of it gets better. But the reason that we increase serotonin in the first place is to cultivate a very specific therapeutic effect for very specific symptoms. And it really is more about the relative level of serotonin compared to dopamine that's more important than the absolute value of one neurotransmitter or another. This is one reason why we don't do a spinal tap and try to measure the level of serotonin in the cerebrospinal fluid, which would be an indication of the level of serotonin in the central nervous system, because there's really no established standard, and a person could be very symptomatic and needing serotonergic augmentation even with a level that is in the average range. And so it's unnecessary. It's not about the level of serotonin, but the efficiency with which the central nervous system is using serotonin as a neurotransmitter. So is it at the synapse? Is it being released by neurons? And is it having the postsynaptic effects on the target cells that we anticipate? And so certain syndromes are associated with deficiencies, if not, again, in the absolute level of serotonin, in serotonergic neurotransmission. Those people need more serotonin, and they need serotonin to be more effective. And so the way that we achieve that greater efficacy is by increasing levels. The important thing to know about serotonin is that it is a chemical that is necessary for the human brain, and therefore the mind, to cultivate a sense of well-being. Serotonin, when it's flowing properly, adequately, allows individuals to be calm and patient. It is the antidote for symptoms that include not only a negative outlook and pessimism and negative thoughts, but anxiety, feeling nervous, including social anxiety, really all forms of anxiety, including anxiety that leads to panic attacks in the extreme, as well as irritability. Serotonin is very good at helping people be patient without even making a conscious effort. The small aggravations become insignificant, and the more significant problems are not overwhelming, and they're easier to tolerate. And so everything gets better. Road rage, irritability with one's children or partner, and worrying about the future. It's that sense of being overwhelmed, that threshold, that increases with increasing levels of serotonin. Other physical thresholds that are increased as we increase serotonin include the threshold for irritability, for getting angry. It takes more, as well as the threshold for tearfulness. It takes more to make a person so upset that they cry. By the same token, happy tears, bittersweet tears that one might shed at a wedding or watching a sad movie, that threshold is also increased. And a person may be very upset, grieving even, but simply not feel the need for that physical catharsis when their serotonin levels are elevated. In fact, if we treat overtly aggressively with the serotonergic agent when a person needs to grieve after the death of a loved one, for example, it could actually interfere with that process and prolong grief. During grief, you need to feel bereft and you need to cry so that you can heal. But serotonin also is very useful in the treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder. It helps the sense of urgency that otherwise accompanies having to do things compulsively, whether it's just a tendency to be tidy and organized, or whether it's checking to make sure the front door is locked 10 times and washing your hands 25 times a day. It's a spectrum, there's a degree of severity, but the increase in serotonin will help you resist the idea that you've got to do something or something bad will happen. that sense of dread, even if it's irrational, and even when a person knows that it's not logical, but feels the overwhelming urge to do it anyway. That's characteristic of OCD. And same with social phobia. If your neurochemistry is disturbed enough, you can feel it with anyone. You can feel it with a first-degree relative. You can feel it with the aunt you've always been close to, your own parents, even your spouse, if it is severe enough, because it's not rational. It is a feeling that is not only mediated, but predicated upon a chemical reaction. And so if there's something wrong with that chemical reaction, then you're going to have that feeling, even if you know it makes no sense and you know that you shouldn't. Irritability is much the same way. Irritability is not simply being upset at an inconvenience. It is being overreactionary. Typically, we know that we're being irritable, and one can even be hyper irritable, where every little thing is getting under your skin. Things that ordinarily don't bother you, and certainly things that bother you, but not to the point where you're fuming and dwelling, because that's the other property that serotonin has. It is anti-obsessional, so that when you don't want to be thinking about something because there's nothing you can do about it, and you banish the thought, it doesn't creep back in. You don't have intrusive, unwelcome, ego-dystonic thoughts, which again can be part of the OCD syndrome, and which occurs with all of us from time to time. How many times has something upsetting happened and we dwell on it and we try not to think about it, but we can't help thinking about it and replaying the scene over in our minds and thinking to ourselves what we should have said? The opposite is true in reverse in terms of anticipatory anxiety. Some people get so worked up that they practice what they're going to say. They even say it out loud when they anticipate a difficult or stressful encounter. This living in the past and anticipating the future and not being present in the moment, that is not always linked to a deficiency in serotonin, but increasing serotonin helps to quell those impulses, helps us be present in the moment, be calm, accept what's happening, and not be dwelling, ruminating on what happened that morning or years ago even, and what might happen tomorrow. And when we do think about those things, when we do have unpleasant memories in particular, we don't relive the emotions. When we tell someone about something that happened or just daydream, we don't feel the same feelings of anger or hurt or embarrassment or fear that accompanied the original experience on medications that increase serotonin. Dopamine is the opposite. It makes people reactionary and angry and excitable and verbal. Similarly, epinephrine and norepinephrine make people excitable, angry, nervous. The libido also correlates with these emotions. So serotonin dampens it. You're less passionate about everything. And dopamine and norepinephrine increase it. The intensity of emotions, the very presence of emotions, both positive and negative, vary with these neurotransmitters. Serotonin calms things down. It helps people let go. It helps them forgive. And it certainly gives one more control over one's emotions, as well as it has effects on everything from temperature regulation to sleep architecture to sexual functioning to gastrointestinal function and a host of other physiologic parameters. But the psychotropic effects are those of diminishing anger, anxiety, the negativity that comes with agitated forms of depression, as well as obsessions and compulsions. Depressions that are characterized by low energy and lack of interest, amotivation, cognitive symptoms, deficits, feeling tired and feeling low, as opposed to being upset and crying and being irritable and anxious. Those require modulation of different neurotransmitters. Serotonergic medications are good, soothing antidepressants for agitated mood problems, whereas medications like Wellbutrin or Strattera, which is marketed for attention deficit disorder, but which in other countries is used as an antidepressant, as well as most of the first generation tricyclic antidepressants. Those medications are more useful for the melancholic depressions. It was the tricyclic clomipramine which just happened to have significant serotonin actions that actually led to the invention of Prozac, which began a whole new era in psychiatry in terms of psychopharmacologic treatment, because it ushered in the era of manipulating serotonin, which then provided treatment not only for melancholic depressions characterized by low energy and hypersomnolence and lack of interest and motivation and sexual desire, but it also addressed those conditions with comorbid anxiety, irritability, tearfulness, OCD, and the more agitated forms of dysphoria. It also ushered in the age of sexual dysfunction as a common side effect due to these medications.